Good morning, everybody. I'm Deborah Young from the RegTech Association. A very big warm welcome to you. I would like to start our meeting today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and offer a warm welcome to all of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends that may be with us today, and offering you a very warm welcome. We've got an international audience this morning, so welcome from wherever you are in the world. We commenced this series called RegTech Open for Business as a direct result of the pandemic. And that was to ensure that RegTech remains on the radar and sending out a very strong message that this is not the time, to take your foot off the gas. And if anything, this is the time to put your foot on very firmly. So our RegTech Open for Business sessions are full of tips, expert insights and resources so that you walk away with some valuable connections, gain insights from practitioners who are experts in their field, and to give you some of the latest thinking and what's happening on the ground around the world, and some of their predictions on opportunities and what's next in the future of RegTech. I mean, at the RegTech Association, we have 3 strategic objectives, and our focus is on advocacy, exports and new market development, and investment to accelerate adoption of RegTech and to create a global centre of excellence. So I'm absolutely delighted to have this great array of excellent people from around the world joining us today. The importance of global collaboration right now is absolutely paramount, and I'm delighted to have this stellar cast. We're going to be talking about trade and exports, and of course we're going to be talking about all things RegTech from the US, Canada and Australia. We're going to talk about impacts of the pandemic and if there are silver lining opportunities for RegTech right now. If you're a US or a Canadian firm looking at APAC markets, or you're an Australian firm looking for growth in Canada or the US, you've got experts here today. And so I'm encouraging your interactivity. Please ask lots of questions. We're going to use the chat function to do that. We've got representatives from 13 countries registered for today, such companies as allied industry associations, banks, law firms, regulators, payment platforms, trade agencies, government, insurance companies, consulting firms and fintechs. There's a few housekeeping issues. We'd love to ask everybody to remain on mute, please, with cameras off, unless you're speaking, in which case we'll invite you to come to the virtual microphone and you can turn your camera on. It is now my very great pleasure to invite to the virtual microphone a very special guest, Steve Rank, who is the Trade and Investment Commissioner for Austrade. He's based in New York. Since joining Austrade in 2009, Steve has held a number of roles as a Trade and Investment Commissioner in Germany, Russia, Central Europe, and as Trade Commissioner and Consul General in Turkey. Additionally, in Australia, he's been Austrade's State Director for Western Australia and managed trade advisory teams. Prior to joining Austrade, Steve held senior management roles in the economic development agencies for New South Wales, Tasmanian state governments, and has extensive experience in corporate and commercial banking sector. A very warm welcome this morning to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and really thank you very much to the RegTech Association for the opportunity to participate in this event today. I'd really like to commend the association on its work in promoting this important sector and supporting the opportunities that technological, consumer preference and regulatory change is presenting to. By way of introduction, Austrade, for those that don't know, is the Australian government's trade and investment aid that delivers quality jobs and prosperity to Australia, as well as assist those Australian RegTech firms that are looking to expand internationally. We're seeing a growing volume of RegTech companies considering Australia as a priority market and Australian companies looking to take their excellent solutions to the world. The RegTech sector has an unprecedented opportunity. We use the word unprecedented a lot lately, I've noticed, to pursue expansion in Australia for 3 main reasons. First, the Australian RegTech ecosystem is particularly strong. Boston Consulting Group rated Australian RegTech scene as having the third highest concentration of RegTech product development in the world. For those that know this industry, it should be no surprise. The firms are founded by people with significant corporate experience and are seeking to solve problems that they've encountered during their professional life. Secondly, the regulatory environment in Australia is evolving with increasing emphasis on privacy, data management, remote working, and our new consumer data rights and open banking regulatory regime. The consumer data rights regime in particular has an application that's much broader than traditional financial services because it will operate in other sectors, including telecommunications, and this presents opportunities for RegTech solutions that can really benefit consumers, companies, and regulators. Just like to sort of briefly mention that the Australian Securities Investment Commission is one of our financial service regulators, and it really recognises the value of RegTech in leading to better outcomes and in maintaining market integrity. It is and also connects with global regulators to discuss RegTech trends. The third factor I wanted to mention is that the sector has remained resilient to the COVID-19 headwinds. And my goodness, what a headwind that has been for 2020, along with others. And why? Because remote working and other forcing businesses to really reconsider how they best meet their regulatory obligations. Now, I said I mentioned three things, but the fourth one is the Australian economy, which until the recent 9 years of consecutive economic with increasing connectivity globally and particularly in Asian markets. Whilst the Australian economy has suffered, like most globally, we are cautiously optimistic as the pandemic is largely under control in Australia and a number of our states across the country have zero or close to zero active COVID cases, which will enable our economies to open sooner and in a safe fashion. We're particularly interested to hear about all the trends and opportunities and dynamics from the discussion today, and we're keen to support RegTech companies for North America and Australian companies through our Australian and global network. We have an extensive footprint in North America. As I mentioned, I'm based in New York, but we have teams in Vancouver, Toronto, Chicago, Houston, Washington, Boston, and San Francisco. So if you're looking for help in those markets, we'd be delighted to assist. Thank you very much, RegTech Association and Deborah, and if I could pass, please.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Steve. Can you give me the thumbs up if you can hear me? Excellent. Great. Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to our MC for the remainder of the event, one of my favourite people. And we usually get him out of bed in the middle of the night to attend our events. So we've kind of done it the other way for him and we've been a bit kinder to him. But I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Brian Clark, who's the co-founder and CEO of Ascent. Brian joins us from Chicago this morning. Brian has a wide breadth of regulatory compliance experience, including across derivatives exchanges, market investigations, clearinghouse compliance, and registered brokerage businesses. He earned an undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Illinois, a Juris Doctor degree from DePaul University, and an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. He is a former Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel and is passionate about entrepreneurship. In 2015, he co-founded Ascent, and Ascent uses artificial intelligence to help customers digitalize and automate their regulatory risk and compliance programs. I'm going to hand to Brian now, who's going to introduce our panel and moderate our discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Deb. Thank you for the kind words. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Looking forward to the conversation today, and we're very, very fortunate to have a great group of folks throughout the world who really are recognized as the industry leaders. So before we go ahead and jump into the questions, I am going to go ahead and ask folks to do some quick introductions of yourselves, and then we will dive in. And again, the theme today being global perspective. So of course we have folks from all around the world. So Deborah, why don't we go ahead and kick it off with you?
Thank you very much. So I'm the CEO of the RegTech Association. I have a background in risk management in financial services many years ago, and that started a long-term love affair with industry bodies and the desire to set standards and increase collaboration. We founded the RegTech Association 3 years ago, started with 8 organisations, and now we're 150 firms, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here and have my affiliate colleagues from North America here today. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Deborah. Donna, why don't we pass it over to you?
Yeah, hello. My name's Donna Bales. I'm the co-founder of the Canadian Regulatory Technology Association. We're about 18 months old. We're a not-for-profit, very similar mandate as the Australia RegTech Association. We look to elevate the level of conversation within the community between key actors, the regulators, the policymakers, the FIs, and the RegTech firms. My day job, I'm a practitioner focused in product development, strategy, business transformation, and a strong focus on compliance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. Joanne, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Barefoot. I'm the CEO and founder of the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, which is a nonprofit in the United States, but with a global scope, working on how to modernize the financial regulatory ecosystem and convert it to what we call a digitally native form. My background includes having been a bank regulator in the United States. I was deputy controller of the currency, and then being in the consulting world, and also spending 2 years at Harvard writing a book on these topics. And I'm the host of a podcast show, Barefoot Innovation, on these same issues.
And if you haven't, I highly recommend listening to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. And then lastly, we have Steve, who you already heard from. Steve, if you want to just give a quick 30-second introduction.
Yes, Steve Rank. I'm the Australian Trade and Investment Commission's commissioner based in New York City, in operating across Europe and other parts of the world, and in Australia also as a banker for many years. So I'm really delighted to be here today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve, and welcome to everyone. So we're going to start with a bit of a round robin. We're going to go into a round robin on our global perspectives. But before we do that, I want to get a little industry background going. And Joanne, obviously, as one of the experts in the field, wanted to start with you. Many folks think that regulatory and compliance people will be passed by digitalization and new technologies. But you've argued that RegTech is actually going to transform those disciplines instead. So why are you so sure about that?
This audience may not need convincing, but I work with financial industry people and regulators all over the world, and there's still a lot of skepticism that we can really modernize this space. It's so complicated. It's got traditional cultures. Again, I'm a former bank regulator myself. I identify with all of this. The cultures are designed to be risk averse. You know, the tech people would say this is a feature, not a bug, that our regulators they move slowly, they're careful. And the same with the compliance professionals who are mirroring that work. But I think it's clearly changing in an accelerating pace. And I point to 2 reasons. The first is that 2 reasons I'm sure of it. The first is that it's already changing. And this event here is a great example of it. People all over the world are bringing new technology into this very complicated, traditionally minded space. We see progress and momentum everywhere you look. And the second reason is, as I just said, that it is already changing. We can look around the world and see regulators as well as RegTech firm leaders who are transforming how they're approaching things. And when we talk about digitizing it, we're not just talking about taking our old processes that were invented in the analog era on paper and layering some automation on top of them. We're talking about deeply redesigning them as if they had been born digital with that technology, which can be better, cheaper, faster, and can enable us to continue to be constantly improving, to get beyond our sort of rigid systems where changing something is so expensive and so difficult. Digital technology is going to be able to enable us to have fluid, continuous improvement.
Great, thanks, Joanne. And let's stick in that vein. I think, Donna, you had mentioned previously that RegTech is actually becoming a business driver in addition to being this cutting edge technology. Can you maybe share a couple ways in which you see it adding commercial value as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that digital theme, like in terms of eKYC, facial identity recognition, onboarding, it is going to move digital. And the faster people move, the better competitive advantage they have. I actually spoke to one of the regulators today, and they were part of the GFIN symposium last week. And they were mentioning that one of the key trends at that symposium was eKYC. And there was a view there that the regulators will be looking to enhance guidelines in that area. I also think that in the wealth space, in terms of risk assessment tools that help in portfolio valuations, provide real value. But I also think probably the biggest overarching thing that COVID has unearthed is that we need to move to more dynamic risk management frameworks and ERM programs. And and I think there's tremendous business value to those firms that are ahead of the curve on that, because there's first mover, there's strategy, but there's also preventive measures in terms of reputational risk, avoiding fines and things that bring dollars to the balance sheet.
That's a great perspective, that it's not just the literal dollars spent or saved. There's also costs in many different areas that can have huge impact when you actually line it up. So that's great. Let's keep going down this theme and talk a little bit about that adoption of these new products and services. Deborah, could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as the keys to why RegTech is growing? I mean, you have a front row seat. And then in that vein, what are some of the roadblocks we can get out of the way? So a two-part question.
You're muted.
All right, we have our first bingo.
Yeah, there you go. So it had to be me, right?
There we go.
No, I'm echoing the comments of both Joanne and Donna, most definitely. Look, I think there's an increased awareness in productivity and efficiency that RegTech can bring. And we had an event last night where we were talking to a bank and we were talking to a RegTech firm. And there was a real focus there is a focus now on back offices everywhere, and reducing the burden of compliance for people. And people was the key word there. This is actually about people. This is not about just compliance for the sake of it or regulation for the sake of it. This is actually about helping people to do their jobs more efficiently, more productively, and actually putting them on the higher order tasks. And I think, Brian, it's your case study, and you can correct me if I've got the numbers wrong, but there's a case study that you present where you talk about an example of two processes that were run in parallel, one using people, which took 1,800 hours, versus one that was done by artificial intelligence and got the same result in 2.5 minutes. So that's it right there. The productivity and efficiency, the ease at which you can help people do their jobs better, smarter, is absolutely critical, and that's why I think there is an increased awareness. But to Donna's point, I think this has also been driven by some degree to the growing number of global regulators that are now coming together and have greater connectivity, that are also able to drive that awareness and the benefits of RegTech in the work that they're doing. And the other thing I think about RegTech beyond financial services, we take a very broad view at the RegTech Association of RegTech, and 40% of our members right now are solving problems outside of financial services. So it's actually, there's a growing awareness because this is actually sector agnostic. And just in the last couple of weeks, the people involved in industrial relations in Australia have been in touch with me saying, how can RegTech solve some of the problems that we have in helping small businesses manage the very complex wage system in Australia? How do they manage that if it's all sitting in a bunch of PDFs? How do you make that dynamic compliance so that it will help them to be able to comply? I mean, I think some of the blockers, you know, how we talk about RegTech as a global community, it would be really helpful if we had some standardization around the taxonomy for RegTech and so that everybody could speak a common language. And so that's one of the things that we are wanting to open up a conversation around. And this will become important to have that standard taxonomy, and to have a common language will actually help investment into the sector. So investors will be really clear about what it is that they're looking at and what problems that it can solve. But it's not very helpful where you've got global investors going to different jurisdictions and everybody is talking about things in a different way. Procurement is still a major stumbling block for the industry, although I think during the pandemic we've seen governments fast-track procurement. So it is possible to do it. And so if it can be done, then it can be done using with RegTech as well. And finally, one of the biggest blockers over time, and one of the reasons why all of our organisations exist that we've got on the speaking panel today, is the lack of access to the right people and to have the right conversation with. And so all of our organisations are helping smooth that path and getting people access to the right people to have the right conversations with. So I think that we're some way to solving that last issue of access.
That's actually a great segue. Obviously, the title of this panel is Global Perspectives. And so we have folks from all over the world here today, folks in the US and Canada and Australia who have experience in many other areas, not just in those jurisdictions. But I think this is maybe a good chance to take a survey globally and talk a little bit about what folks are seeing from their neck of the woods. So let's start with Joanne. What are some of the most transformational areas you're seeing of RegTech that are developing, and maybe in the US, but also globally today? You have a pretty broad perspective.
Yeah. To answer that, I'll start by jumping off from what Deborah said about the taxonomy challenge. We are concluding, and others are as well, that if there's sort of a missing link, a linchpin that's not in place in this whole system, it is the lack of standardized data architecture and standardized taxonomies. And because we need to create a system that's going to be interoperable across. The whole point is to turn this information into digitized formats so that we can use it as we need. We can look at it in real time, we can look at it in complete data, and we can share it with appropriate protections and limitations. So I will mention that our organization, AIR, we've just put out a document we call the RegTech Manifesto, which is intentionally provocatively named to try to get people to read it. And we would love, it's an RFC, a request for comments. We would love for people to come and read it and comment on it at our website, which is regulationinnovation.org. And then we are feeding the results of this work into what we're calling the Regulatory Design Project, and trying to convene in a nonprofit setting an ability to have a public-private partnership that's going to tackle that specific issue. And I think the starting point for it, and this is definitely one of the huge trends underway, is to begin with regulatory reporting, the data that the regulator needs to look at and the risk manager and compliance officer needs to look at. I'm aware of 4 big projects around the world, and I'm sure there are more that are all focusing on this. The Financial Conduct Authority in the UK has a very sophisticated project they've been running for a couple of years now on DRR, digital regulatory reporting. I am a judge in the G20 Tech Sprint, and it has 3 use cases. If people are not familiar with this, take a look at it. The G20 talked to regulators all over the world and distilled use cases, problems that they are working on, into 3 problem statements, one of which is digital regulatory reporting. We'll have the results of that this fall. And then we have one in the United States by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, trying to figure out how to digitize the bank report that's called the call report, which is sort of the backbone of banking regulation and is currently a quarterly report. So by definition, when the regulators look at that report, it's obsolete, especially in this pandemic environment where everything is so volatile. And then I know of another project here in the US that's not public yet, but that we're helping with that'll be focusing on the same thing. So this sort of baseline layer of how can we get information expressed in common terminology, common taxonomy, and then use it for reporting and switch reporting into being instead of push formats to begin to move it into a pull format where the regulator and the risk manager can get the information you need when you need it. And Deborah, you talked about this being for people. We're seeing this real interest emerging on human-centered design in the regulatory space, which, you know, as compliance people, nobody's ever thought about giving us great UX, you know, but that's starting to change as well. So those are a few areas. The other big one, I know I'm taking a long time here, but the other really big one is the move toward machine executable regulation, which again has been pioneered by the FCA in the UK. And back to the example that you gave, Deborah, of the case study, the ability to issue some regulations in the form of computer code, have the company plug them in and have a result back in seconds rather than years, and have it be right. There's a lot of interest globally in that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so let's stay with this theme of kind of the global perspectives, but let's go into Canada in particular. And Donna, I'm going to kick it over to you. Can you share your perspectives about what you're seeing from the Canadian landscape?
You're muted.
Okay, sorry. What I've seen in Canada in terms of in terms of RegTech or innovation or
let's take the same theme. So the transformational areas of RegTech that you're seeing developed out of Canada.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, one of the key areas is AI and the use of AI, and Canada is very strong in this area, especially out of the ecosystem in Montreal. So there is a lot of work. We actually, as an organization, wrote a paper on responsible AI and the human product design efforts in order to ethically manage AI risks. So that was very well received, and that is a huge focus area in Canada. So now the conversation is now moving around governance. So how do you govern AI? So this is a huge topic area. In terms of reporting, like, this is the problem that won't go away. Like I mean, I was on a regulatory project for MiFID I while I lived in the UK, and that was 2006, right? We were preparing for 2007, and this problem won't go away. And I believe that it has to be a two-way program between the regulators and the industry. The industry collaborations have started and failed. Like, the UK tried to do it with MiFID I, and basically they created a fragmented market. So this does need to move forward, and I love the efforts by the FCA in digital reporting and linking that with the machine readable rule books. I think it's essential to drive that problem. But in terms of transformation, it really is. If here in Canada, there's a lot of strong focus around AI, and then I think that the other thing that Deborah talked about. People and process. We had a podcast last week on RPA, and RPA is actually something that people can use right now and actually accelerate that human element of processes. And it doesn't have the lead time that AI does, because there is a lot of work that's going to need to be done in terms of AI oversight, managing AI risk, managing governance. There's been some good work, like here in Canada, we have the CIO Strategy Council, which is a partner of the CRTA, that has started with some design principles, but there's a lot more to go. But then there's RPA that's just right there and can actually make kind of quite a big benefit, and it's right and available and easy to use.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Some really interesting new technologies, and as we see these products roll out using them, certainly a lot of opportunities for innovative ideas and also for existing players. So let's flip to the other side of the world. So we're kind of pinballing all over. We're going to go to Australia, and actually I'm going to ask Steve. I know you're located in New York, but obviously on behalf of the Australian government, what recent developments have you seen from government and regulators that impact the RegTech sector that is transforming our collective community?
Right. There's probably three things I'd focus on. One I mentioned earlier, which was the consumer data rights legislation. It will enable innovation to occur. It will enhance competition in the financial services sector initially, but in time that'll flow through to other sectors. And that really reflects Deborah's point that 40% of the members of the association are beyond financial services. So this will have an all-pervasive effect. The legislation is about, I think, 42 days old. Someone might be able to correct me, maybe 40 days old or young. So it's early days, but it'll be quite transformative, I think. The other one, I think, second point is around the strong regulatory focus in Australia on anti-money laundering and compliance by financial services firms following our recent government banking inquiry. This inquiry exposed significant shortcomings in the protection of consumer rights and systems, which have left management boards incredibly exposed to fines and prosecution. And this is a problem that RegTech can solve for them. It really is part of the solution to managing those risks much better and better protect the board's employees and also. The third point is this is an area of strong interest from our government. Prime Minister Morris recently noted the importance of technology solutions to reduce a regulatory burden and aid with compliance. And this is part of, I think, a move post-COVID of trying to reduce a regulatory burden on business and improve efficiency. And this is supported by a couple of pillars. One is around a digital task force to boost the digitalisation of the Australian business sector. There's also a parliamentary committee looking at boosting Australia's RegTech, and also we've recently released a national blockchain roadmap, and it has a specific stream amongst as part of that. So there are all these elements in the government sphere which has shown great attention to the sector, which is really fantastic, I think, for looking at Australia as a location for RegTech.
Great, thanks, Steve. And let's continue down that Australia path. And Deb, kick it over to you. Obviously, as one of the organizations that is a leader in the RegTech community, what's your perspective on the ecosystem, both locally in Australia and also globally?
Thanks, Brian. So I think echoing Steve's comments from before, Australia are currently enjoying number 3 position in the world in terms of the concentration of RegTech product development. And that really has been driven out of Australia's, I guess, strong culture and a reputation in compliance and regulation. And I think that has been aided by what we've referred to earlier around things like the GFIN and the regularity that global regulators are now coming together. They're running things like tech sprints, which Joanne just mentioned, and things like that are very positive in driving adoption. This global connectivity of regulators and even our associations who are, I should shout out, because these are challenging times for our associations right now to keep the wheels turning with minimal resources, but doing great work by kind of employing that for industry by industry thing. And so that's the industry coming together. So, this collaboration between regulators, the associations, and then the regulated entities themselves, having this global connectivity will help everybody be able to seize the opportunities and create the connections and to get those POCs and trials, happening more easily. The other one thing I would say, which is helping both locally and globally, is that our association has 100 RegTech vendors. Now, being part of our community, what that's allowing, and I'm sure Donna would share this as well, what that's actually allowing is that those organisations are then kind of on this flotilla, and then they're able to share amongst one another, and that's sharing best practice, sharing their experience in the trenches, helping one another. If they don't know somebody at a certain organisation, they can tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, did you know about these guys? And then there's also that potential for them to work together to potentially go to a client with an end-to-end solution. So there's all kinds of things that we're seeing, which I think is really interesting. So they can best be boiled down to the global connectivity, what's actually happening in the local scene, helping those RegTechs connect with one another, but then using the associations to then kind of launch themselves out onto a more global stage.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think that actually is a good segue again into kind of our next set of questions that I wanted to go, and we're going to do this a little more briefly before we move into open questions. So we'll do some quicker answers on these. As the industry matures, and we've heard a lot of great feedback on technologies. I'll do a review at the end in about 30 seconds of what I've taken notes on. We have three major constituencies for each of your organizations: regulators, customers, and vendors. Obviously, Steve, as a regulator yourself, what are each of you seen as important ways that those groups interact? How do we continue to help foster a healthy RegTech ecosystem? And obviously contributing to all the work that you're doing, the manifesto, the standard taxonomies, the AI papers, the details that you folks are putting out are really bringing us forward. How can all of us contribute to the organizations that you have to build this ecosystem together? And maybe Deb, let's just stick with you and start there.
Yeah, so definitely we had vendor-led roots. There are about 8 or 10 companies that came together initially to try and solve this problem of collaboration. But I think over the last 3 years, we've been very careful to build out our membership and our engagement across all parts of the ecosystem. So that has included the regulated entities, and it has included the regulators very much on that journey, because they're absolutely critical to our impact as an organisation. So right now, as I said, we've got about 100 vendors and about 50 corporates on board, and we have relationships with all of the Australian financial services regulators, and are now starting to see international regulators come to us to increase engagement. So I think while we did certainly start out as being vendor-led, and we certainly are well represented on our board by vendors, we will need to see a balance as we grow and flourish, that representation will need to come from all different parts of the ecosystem.
Great. And Joanne, how about you? I know we've crossed paths many times all over the world, actually. I think sometimes literally in London and other places. So you have a wonderful global perspective. What are you seeing as ways that we can bring these constituencies together to continue to grow the ecosystem?
So in the interest of being pithy, as you said, the single key thing I would point to is the tech sprint format. Tech Sprint, as you know, is a regulatory hackathon. I think the FCA gave it the name Tech Sprint because they didn't want to use the word hack. And it's such an intensive learning experience, especially for the regulators. It's collaborative by nature. It brings together the subject matter experts, the industry, the regulators, and gets the tech people to the table, which we usually don't have in the regulatory world. And they are fun, they're intense. You focus on solving a problem that really matters, such as anti-money laundering, that's combating terrible things like human trafficking. I recommend much greater use of tech sprint as a learning tool and a collaboration tool. People come out of a tech sprint with new relationships, and those continue to flourish.
Wonderful. Donna, I'm going to kick it over to you now. What are you seeing in Canada that we can bring these three constituencies, regulators, customers, and vendors together that could help build the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the beauty of our organizations is we have a neutral setting for people to come together. And I think that's really important for regulators because they can't look like they're favoring one firm or another. And there is education that comes with emerging technologies. So I think just the fact that, you know, we're formed and we've got that neutral setting. And when there are good policy changes, like we're about to, on the prudential side, update our outsourcing reg, our model risk management reg, our RCM framework, actually getting all those players together and talking about it in roundtables and the issues, especially around outsourcing. I think outsourcing is a double-edged sword. And actually what COVID has heightened is that we're probably going to move to more managed services. So it becomes even more important. So I think it's getting those people around the room around a particular topic. It's so important for the education and getting tech involved at the beginning, not at the end, not after you've put your policy out.
Point.
Right.
Wonderful. And Steve, from a regulator perspective, what are ways that you're seeing that the constituencies can all engage? Obviously, from the organizations we have today that we're talking with that bring a lot of expertise and knowledge, you folks, the regulators, customers, vendors, what are you seeing as ways that everyone can interact to foster a healthy RegTech ecosystem?
Yeah, Brian, we're not so much on the regulatory side, but more on the commercial side. So we're working with the commercial players as well as the regulators and the association. So I think what we try to bring is that international connectivity, which has been raised by everyone else. I think is really critical for this sector. So with our teams in Europe and Asia and Australia and North America, we can sort of bring that together and look at those trends and help bring, coalesce at that to actually for the benefit of consumers or vendors and others.
Wonderful. And that's correct, Steve. Thank you for correcting me. Obviously not a regulator, but a commercial entity as a function of the Australian government. So thank you for that. We're going to do some quick hits here. We got a couple minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in here. I think we have a couple that we will hit here in a moment as part of these quick hits. So we're going to do a round robin, rapid fire. So we're going to look for 15-second answers. I'm going to go in order. What is the biggest opportunity in RegTech at the moment? We're going to start with Deborah.
Australian-UK trade, free trade agreement negotiations.
Wonderful. Joanne?
Biggest opportunity. I think it's participating in work on regulatory reporting from both the industry and the government side.
Wonderful. Donna?
I think the focus on culture and conduct and the change in supervisory perspective around assessments, e-discovery, filing.
Great. And Steve?
I'll take two, the consumer data rights legislation in Australia, which I've mentioned, but also there are real world problems that need to be solved, and RegTech is really a key part of that. Excellent.
All right, question number 2. We're going to go in the same order. What's the biggest risk you see in RegTech? Deborah, we'll start with you.
The length of the sales cycle and the lack of understanding of patient capital required.
I can second that one. All right, let's go to Joanne.
Yeah, I would echo length of the sales cycle. And related to that is the question of how does the bank or customer know whether you can rely on these very young technologies. The newer technologies are better than the old ones, I'll just say it. And because they were born digital, but they don't have long track records. So what do we do about that? We have to have ways to test them.
Great. Donna?
And ditto to both of you, but also I'd say scalability, especially now when people pivoted very fast to what they know, the tech they know. So how does the RegTech firm compete with that when people are moving to managed services?
And Steve?
Yeah, if I could add to Donna's, I think the ability to be agile and move very quickly is really critical. We're in a very uncertain world at the moment, and COVID is creating lots of disruption, but also lots of opportunity.
Absolutely agree. Okay, so last one. What themes are you most excited about in RegTech over the next 12 months? And so Deb, kick it back to you on this.
Okay, well, I'm excited about everything generally, as you know, but I'm in particular, I'm excited about the potential for us to either develop or acquire some kind of digital marketplace to bring everybody together, buyers, sellers, regulators together. And I'm also particularly excited about our Accelerate RegTech 2021 conference next year, 18th of March. Write that down.
All right, we'll move over to Joanne.
If you hadn't said 12 months, I would have definitely said AI. And even within the 12 months, I think that we're making progress on figuring out. Donna, I'd love to see your paper on responsible AI. I don't know where to find it, but figuring out how to use AI to its full benefit and also responsibly is going to be the huge breakthrough over the next 2 years anyway.
Yeah. The paper's on our website, and I agree. That was my answer, really. I think it's the governance around AI. We're doing some work on that, and also I think this whole movement to a dynamic risk framework will be using AI, and I think that's super exciting because I think, you know, from a business point of view, it's got a business element to it, so it makes RegTech kind of sexy, really.
Oh, yeah.
Names, those are words you haven't always heard in the same sentence.
Four-letter word, sorry.
Here first. Wonderful. And Steve, what are you most excited about in RegTech over the next 12 months?
Basically, we're in a high-risk environment, which creates lots of opportunities and lots of change and rapid change. We used to talk about dog years. I think we'll be talking about COVID years in the years to come. That change is going to be incredibly rapid.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, on that note, thank you all for the wonderful answers to these questions. We're going to kick it over to everyone on the chat. There's a number of questions, so we're going to start going down the list here. For Deborah, do you think we can establish healthy forums where regulators are willing to have vendors come talk to them and be open and supportive about how technology can help solve the problems that their regulated firms have?
Yes, I think we can establish that. And in fact, I think it's already happening, and it's happening in a number of ways. If we just look at one of the, maybe two of the regulators in Australia have actually run very proactive RegTech programs, and at least one of them actually have an innovation hub that you can contact at any time. From the other side of the coin, rather than waiting for regulators to facilitate those kinds of opportunities, our association is running events every fortnight. The regulators are attending those events. So I would urge you, if you see our RegTech Edge events coming at you, is go and attend those. If you're not members of the association, please join, because the only way you get a right to it to present at those is to be a member. But that is another great way of being able to bring the whole ecosystem together. And you'll find at most of our events that we run, the regulators are attending those. So it's really important to keep coming, stay connected, ask that very question, because there's probably some regulators on the line looking at that right now. Thanks. Hope that answers that.
Thanks, Deb. Yep, we're going to keep going down the list, and I'm going to try and work with these a little bit to make sure we get as many answered as possible. There's a question: do you see a move towards platforms that encompass multiple RegTech solutions, or will new technologies help smaller companies compete and sell point solutions? So do you need to be kind of a broader platform play, or can you be a point solution in this fragmented world? I'm actually, Joanne, I'm going to go to you for that one.
I was going to say, I'd love to answer that one. First of all, I think the whole system is going to move to platforms. Currently we live in sort of walled gardens with certain tech vendors having closed ecosystems. I think that's going to go away, and we're going to move to interoperable plug and play formats that anybody can plug into. But in the meantime, yes, I think RegTech companies are already starting to band together to offer that end-to-end approach that can be interoperable with each other, so greatly simplifying the adoption by the customer.
Great, thank you. And we have a note that APRA is here as well today, so part of getting the regulators together with folks in the industry, great to see. And then I think we have one last question for Donna. Has there been any work done on removing bias in AI? I know that's a larger problem across many industries, but I don't know if you have any insights to share on that one.
I think the work in that area is pretty infant at the moment. There's definitely proof of concepts out there. We actually are going to do a deep dive on bias in the next month or two, because actually I was talking to one of the FIs just a couple weeks ago, and I just asked them, okay, what is the hardest AI risk for you to manage? And it's this absolutely, definitely bias. So there's so I think the work in the bias area is fairly infant at the moment, but we'll learn a little bit more from the panel in a few weeks.
Great.
The experts come in.
Wonderful. So let's do. I'm going to do a quick summary. I think that's what we have on the questions. I don't have any others. We have a number of notes in here on co-chairs. We have the FinTech Association of Hong Kong's RegTech group, some regulators. So a lot of folks in the ecosystem coming out and appreciate obviously all your participation today and the questions you raised. Quick summary on what we talked through today. Number one, and I have three items and then a couple of references. So first, RegTech is better, faster, cheaper, and good for bottom lines. Number two, RegTech is transforming three things. Really taking a human-centered design approach to create high utility products. Number two, in this area, digitalization of regulation and the actual usefulness, not the, hey, we threw AI at it, but actual utility of these new technologies that are coming. And then third, standardizing the taxonomy and language needed both locally and globally to encourage adoption and build the ecosystem. And then the last item, and Joanne, I love the way you said this, regulation, it's a necessity, but we need to solve problems that matter. We need to work together to do it. So great panel today. Thank you, everyone. I think we have a couple of reference materials. The RegTech Association is putting out some materials on standard taxonomy. The Alliance for Innovative Regulation has a RegTech Manifesto and a current call for feedback on that. And the Canadian RegTech Association has a responsible AI paper. So with that, I think we have a couple minutes left in the morning in Australia, the evening here on the west side. And thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you so much, Brian. And you just did my wrap up for me. So thank you very much for that. My call out was going to be to each of the organisations, because we really want these sessions to be around tools and resources too. So everybody walks away with a little bit of a nugget of goodness that they can, tuck up and have a look at post this event. The event is being recorded, so you can access that, and please amplify that. And we do apologise for any issues there were some issues in people being able to access the link, but I think we managed to get there in the end. But please rest assured it has been recorded, so we'll circulate that on social. Look, really great to have you all with us today. Appreciate your time from all the different parts of the world. And with that being said, I might draw things to a close. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like connectivity with anybody that was on the call today. And if you want to see some great case studies about RegTech, go to Ascent RegTech's website, because they've got some great case studies on there that will show some of the productivity and efficiency that we've been talking about today. Thank you very much, Steve, from New York. Appreciate your patience in getting your tech sorted. All good. And good morning, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Deb.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody.